Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the afternoon session of the Development Panel of the Allerdale Borough Council today on the 17th of June 2020. And the application we're going to hear this afternoon is the planning application reference Foxtrot Uniform Lima /2020/0203. And this is valid from the 0302 of 2021, and the location is the land at the Station Road, Aspatria, Wigton, Cumbria. The applicant Gleeson's, and the proposal is for 65 dwellings. I will hand you over to the officer concerned.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. My name is Rebecca Wilson, and I'm Senior Planning Officer at Allerdale Borough Council, and I've been dealing with this application for the last few months. How I intend to present the proposal is I will very briefly give you an outline of the proposal, then I will consider the site characteristics, in brief go through the consultation responses, and then taking account of those consultation responses, summarise how we have assessed the scheme and planning matters related to principle, house types and tenure, including affordable housing, the layout, the design, the materials, the traffic, transport and highway safety matters. And I'll also address residential amenity, the landscape and visual impacts, ecology, heritage, and that will be followed up by our balance and conclusions and the officer recommendation. So setting off with the actual proposal in brief. The proposal provides a scheme for 65 number dwellings with a varied mix of 10 house types. As you can see, I'll put you onto the site plan as proposed. There will also be 6 affordable houses as part of the scheme. Hopefully you can see those in, oh, that's a flood routing plan, next one. Hopefully you can see those in the affordable housing plan. The affordables equate to 3 for social rent. They are those marked up in green, and 3 for low cost home ownership, and those are marked up in blue. Those will be 2-bedroom type properties. The scheme, as you can see, I'll just go back to the site plan as proposed. The scheme also provides for areas of public open space. Central in that area of public open space are 3 retained trees, which add some character to the site. In terms of, there is landscaping throughout the scheme and around the boundaries. There will be a play area to the southwestern element of the scheme, just above also the sustainable urban drainage attenuation pond, which is to the southwest of the site. Also from the southwest of the site, you can see a spur coming off, and that is the route of the proposed drainage arrangements, both for the surface water and the foul sewage, and that will follow down to the edge of the rugby club site, which is parallel to the railway line. To the actual west of the site is the main access, that's the highway access. And I just want to point out a key element of this, that they will be incorporating access and visibility displays in part of the land which is currently the Aspatria Rugby Union car park. I will take you through photographs and explain, once I go through the photographs, how all these arrangements work. What I also want to point out, in the northeastern corner of the site, is originally within the scheme there was going to be pedestrian access to an unmade or part unmade lane known as Pringle. But through the course of the application, and when considering the comments that have come back from consultees and neighbour comments, that is no longer part of the scheme. And indeed, the boundary, the existing hedgerow will be retained, and there is only a footpath that serves a particular area of public open space in that northeastern corner. So, looking at the actual site characteristics, the site is a 2.6 hectare site. or 6.421 acres, and sits to the south of Aspatria town centre. Through the middle of Aspatria town centre is the A596, which is a main highway route. And as I've already previously mentioned, the scheme sits directly to the north of the Aspatria Rugby Union ground, and you can probably see the rectangle square to the southwest. That is the main pitch, and then directly to the east of that there is an area between the site and the railway line, and those are the training pitches for the rugby club. To the west of the site, a small square type box, that is the clubhouse, and to the north of that is the Aspatria car park. Moving further west, there is the BT building, and then moving further north along the northern boundary, there is a small residential estate known as Mart Close. Moving to the northeast of the site are commercial properties, and these abut directly to the boundary of the site. So taking you through some photographs before we move on to more detail of the proposal. As you can see, hopefully from this southern point of the site, it is a sloping site. It has a 6.5 metre fall from north to south. And what this actually means is, as part of the development, if you can bear with me, there has been some cut and fill arrangements. So the red area at the top is where there is some land that is reduced in level. And what this has meant is that there is a retaining boundary along the northern edge of the development. And there is some build-up of land within the middle element of the scheme. So that's quite important when we start to consider the consultation responses in terms of privacy and overlooking, particularly with regard to Mart Close to the north and to properties which are on the east of the site known as Pringle. So just going back now to the photographs, and I'll canter through these as I've just shown you. This is a view to the northwest. Actually from the training pitches. This is at the south of the site, and you can see in the distance the actual rugby club. And this is a view actually now to the very south of the site, actually where the actual railway line is, and you get a good view there of the main pitch of the Aspatria Rugby Union Football Club, the training pitch. And then directly behind those posts is the actual site itself, which you can see is a rising site up towards the centre of Aspatria. This is quite an important photograph for you to consider, because it's the route of the proposed surface water drainage scheme. Now, I mentioned before that spur that actually, and I'll take you back to the actual site location plan, or the drainage plan. And marked up in yellow, the photograph I've just shown you was where the tyres were, is essentially where that yellow line is. And that is the route of the surface water drainage scheme. And that would be from the attenuated pond to the southwest of the site, and it would link in to the actual surface water and foul water infrastructure that exists adjacent to and parallel to the railway line. Moving back onto the slides again. This is a view from the actual training pitch. And again, an important slide because it shows the relationship of the actual, the posts, the touch line, and the actual floodlights. And when we move on to considering the consultation responses, in particular from the Town Council and from Sports England, to be mindful of the position of the actual site to those training pitches. Again, a view of the southern boundary. There is some screening already on that southern boundary, so which does afford some screening from the actual training pitches. This is a view of the southwestern corner. This is the location of the actual the SUDS attenuation pond. And here is a view. This is essentially where the new access will be, and you've got a view of the site to your left, and the clubhouse, car park, and the main pitch beyond. In terms of the main access, there are visibility displays required. To the north, these are up Station Road, and then to the west, this would be around the corner. And again, an important photograph, because there will likely be a requirement through a Section 278 agreement for a footway to be in front of where you've got the actual lighting pole and the actual signage for a new pedestrian access that would link on to the existing footway, which is actually on the west side of Station Road. Just to give you some context of the types of dwellings and the characterisation of development within the Spatria. There's a lot of red sandstone, but there is red brick, as you can see there on King Street, and there is render, smooth render. There are a number of different uses within the town centre, so it's an accessible site. You've got pubs, and you've got schools and other types of town centre uses. This is actually Mark Close. I described this earlier. This is a small cul-de-sac which is directly to the north of the site, and this would be a view down onto the site from this particular bungalow. That's the bungalow, and that's kind of the view that they would get from their rear garden. And as I mentioned earlier, the site is dug out, so the properties that would be on that northern boundary of the site would be sat well down. Just to give some context as well in relation to how a Spatria works, to the very northern boundary are these industrial buildings, but as you can see, the industrial buildings are still in close proximity to existing dwellings, and very much within a Spatria, you've got a mixture of dwellings and commercial employment type buildings, and they're all in fairly close proximity to each other. Now, here, this is a view down Spatria High Street, and this links onto a lane which is known as Pringle. It's a made lane at the top. To the right-hand side, you can also see that Pringle is closely located to commercial buildings. And then we have a view. I'm now looking from the bottom of Pringle Lane, and the site is on the left. The key matter on this is that Pringle is actually set quite low down, so that's why it was important to actually get those upper levels reduced in height, and also to think about the types of dwelling that would be sited on that eastern boundary to protect against privacy, overlooking and overshadowing. And there we have the view of Pringle on the eastern boundary as I look northeast across the site. And again, just giving some context there in terms of Pringle Lane. This is actually, I'm standing on that elevated position of the existing site on the northern boundary, and you can see Pringle, how it's set down and falls away down Pringle Lane on the eastern boundary of the site. You've also got the commercial buildings and the existing the existing electrical substation. And then also on the eastern boundary, I'm trying to show you here the trees and hedgerows that provide screening as existing on that eastern boundary. And the last slide is at the top of the site, giving the panoramic views, and you can see how you've got those distant views of the Lake District, some of the, I think it's the commercial buildings to the south of the site, and the training pitches beyond. I'm also going to show you some third-party images of traffic on Station Road. This is the traffic moving towards the town centre, showing how traffic can look at different times, and the types and nature of the traffic can be HGVs, cars, and farm vehicles as well. So now moving forward in terms of considering the representations from consultees, I've mentioned some of the key issues, and these have been picked up as concerns as part of the consultation process. I'll just go back to the site layout plan initially, just as a holding plan while we go through the consultations. So Aspatriá Town Council have objected to the proposal, and in brief, they have objected through concerns over the access arrangements, the busyness of Station Road, the visibility concerns on the access onto Station Road. They were concerned initially, although as I've mentioned, it's been resolved, that there was a pedestrian access on that northwestern corner onto Pringle, but through the course of the application, it became apparent that nobody knew who owned Pringle Lane, and so therefore that is why now the pedestrian access will be also from Station Road, and that's why there would need to be a further a pavement and a link onto the western pavement on Station Road. Other issues from the Town Council was there was concern whether there was actually a housing need, concern over lack of facilities and infrastructure, and also that the surface water attenuation pond, which appeared to be adjacent to and above the rugby pitches, if it did overflow or leak of some kind, could have a damaging effect on pitches, and there was concern over the impact on the rugby club and the impact of the development on the businesses, the business use and the use of the rugby club for sporting events and other events. In terms of environmental health, there are no objections, but they do recommend noise protection measures and a construction management plan, and this can be secured by planning condition. County Highways, who are also the local lead flood authority, they consider the scheme acceptable in principle from a highway perspective, although there are elements of the scheme that do require some further technical information, but their view is that this can be managed through planning conditions and the highway adoption process. And I just want to go through again about the pedestrian crossing point, and that Cumbria Highways have set out that this would need to be provided on Station Road. However, this would be agreed and deliverable as part of the Section 278 agreement, which is under the Highways Act. Cumbria Highways have set out that they believe there is sufficient visibility displays and they should be at least 43 metres from the corner to provide the necessary visibility display. In terms of drainage, again, in principle, they're happy with the surface water attenuation scheme. The site itself couldn't accommodate a full infiltration system by virtue of the clay type nature of the actual soil. So there are some further technical matters that still need to be addressed, in particular that a 4-bay area which allows for a small area to catch silt for cleansing and dredging, so some technical details on that. They have advised that a full maintenance plan would be required. That could be secured through a Section 106 legal agreement, and also the maintenance schedule could be agreed through planning condition. In terms of the rights of way officer, there are no objections. County archaeologists, no objections, but they advise a planning condition for the implementation of a programme of archaeological work in accordance with a written scheme of investigation. That would need to be submitted by the applicant to the local planning authority for their approval and discharge. Cumbria Fire and Rescue have no objections. United Utilities have no objections in principle. Allerdale Borough Council Housing Department, they have considered the 2016 housing study for the town of Aspatriá and the adjoining parishes of Aspatriá. Those are All Hallows, Allenby, Blennerhassett, Trepenna, Bothell, Threapland, Bromfield, Outerside, Allaby, Plumland and West Newton. And they advise the greatest need for affordable housing is for 1-bedroom type properties. They also reflect about space standards as well. in terms of affordable sale properties, because although that it would be highly likely that in terms of a registered social landlord, a one-bedroom unit would most likely be a two-bedroom unit with perhaps a room where you would have storage facilities. What Allerdale Borough Council Housing Department are keen to see that two-bedroom properties generally would meet the housing space standards. So moving on, Natural England have no comments, and the Building Control Access Officer did point out that initially they needed to provide more information on what's called M41, M42 and M43 standards. Through the course of the application, it's been confirmed that the M41 standards are met, and also that the M42 standards are met, which require accessible and adaptable dwelling standards. Indeed, the M42 standards are actually greater in the scheme than the 20% that is required in the Allerdale Borough Council Local Plan Policy SA5. It does not meet, however, the wheelchair user dwelling standard M43. And I will go into more detail on that through the course of the application. In terms of Sports England, they have maintained their objections. They can be remedied, and they have requested additional information in order to understand the likelihoods of any impacts and if any mitigation is required to address their concerns. And their concerns relate to the route of the drainage through the northern edge of the rugby club and what mitigation might be required to protect the rugby club pitches. They have requested a ball strike risk assessment, and the idea behind that is to understand whether the netting is required behind the posts or the type of boundary treatment that would be required to protect from ball strike for the residential properties. And they've also considered matters relating to noise as well within the site as well. Network Rail have also advised that they would need a little bit more technical information on the surface water drainage arrangements to the northern boundary of the Network Rail infrastructure. And lastly, in terms of representations, in terms of the neighbour community representations, there have been 46 objections, many of which were duplicate type objections, but I can set out in brief because the full detail is actually within the body of the report. But the key concerns relate to principle, the design and landscape, heritage matters, concern about archaeology, the setting of listed buildings, affordable housing provision, are they actually meeting the need, highway safety. There was a lot of concern initially about Pringle and their residential amenity with regard to the footpath link and the maintenance of that lane, and concern about overlooking, loss of light and overshadowing from Pringle, and similarly from Mark Close, and also concern about drainage, flooding and subsidence issues on the site, and concerns about adverse effects on wildlife. I'd just like to point out there was an initial objection from Aspatia Rugby Club, but that has been fully withdrawn through the course of the application. So moving now on to the principle of the development. The site, in officers' view, is a sustainable location. It is well related to the existing built form of Aspatria, as you can see. And Policy S3 expects growth to be inside settlement limits, and it is within the settlement limit of Aspatria. It's clearly within walking distances of services and bus stops via Station Road, albeit that be slightly uphill. And there is good access and connection to the Aspatria railway line. So Aspatria is actually defined as a key service centre in Policy S3 of the Allerdale Local Plan. And this policy seeks Aspateria to provide 4% of the plan's overall growth. So this equates in combination to the other allocated sites within Aspateria to 218 dwellings. This application is for 65 dwellings. But also of note, this site is an allocated site under policy SA15 of Allerdale Local Plan Part 2, but that was for 60 units. So this site, this proposal actually brings forward an additional windfall of 5 dwellings, 65 in total. So it must be determined as to whether 65 dwellings instead of the allocated 60 is actually acceptable. Officer's view is that the additional 5 dwellings can be accommodated on the site, and the site layout has shown those arrangements. So I have been mindful through the course of the application, especially when considering matters that have been presented by the Town Council and others about infrastructure requirements and facilities within Aspateria. As I've just mentioned, it is acknowledged that in close proximity to the site, policy SA15 is also allocated for 20 units, and there's a further site, policy SA16 at Noblecroft for 100 units. But in terms of the responses from Cumbria Highways and other infrastructure providers, the site can accommodate 65 units, subject to technical issues being resolved. So in terms of moving on to house type and tenure, I've already mentioned 65 dwellings, 10 house types with a mix of the 1 to 2, 3, 4 bedroom type properties. So it's a good mix of house types. And in terms of tenure, there are 6 affordable homes that will be provided, and that is compliant with the expectations of Allerdale Local Plan Part 2, which requires in Aspateria 10% of the new homes to be affordables. So the affordables, as I've mentioned previously, 3 for rent and 3 for low-cost home ownership. And those would be a type of dwelling known as the 201 type. And just to remind you again that the housing need in Aspateria is for 1 to 2 bedroom type properties. I mentioned earlier about the M42 compliant dwellings. Those are the accessible and adaptable properties, and the scheme is successful in terms of this arrangement. It provides 19 properties, or 29% in compliance with M42, and that's actually 9% higher than the 20% that is the requirement, the delivery requirement under policy SA5 of Allerdale Local Plan Part 2. However, there are no dwellings that are compliant with policy policy M43, and those are the wheelchair accessible homes, and normally you would expect 10% of the homes to be of this standard. I note that policy SA5 states that in relation to the provision of M42 and M43, the council will take a flexible approach to these requirements where the applicant can demonstrate that it would significantly harm the financial viability of the scheme. So it is clear there is conflict with policy SA5 due to the lack of M43 homes, and no viability appraisal has been provided by the applicant to evidence that it wouldn't be viable to deliver that particular policy requirement. However, in officers' minds, the application should not fall on this one discordance alone, given the significant benefits of the delivery of so many open market properties and affordable homes, some of which are M42 compliant. However, it is within the member's gift to apportion different weight to this matter. In terms of the layout, design and the access, the properties are mostly a red brick finish with grey roof tiles, although there are some render type properties on that western boundary. But the less vernacular use of the brick is on the less prominent plots. We've already mentioned about the main access from Station Road, and I've also mentioned about, in terms of the layout, the areas of public open space, in particular the central area of public open space where the 3 existing trees on the site are retained. In terms of garaging, there'll be 141 car parking spaces and 5 visitor spaces. This is compliant with the expectations of Cumbria Highways and does not include the actual garages. The arrangements of the parking are such that they tend to be to the sides of properties, trying to resist the car dominance in terms of visual appearance, and this is considered appropriate in terms of the layout of the scheme. We've already mentioned in terms of the Section 278 agreement, and that really relates to this need for a sustainable pedestrian access and the fact that there will be this short requirement of a footpath that links on to that existing western footpath to Station Road, which will provide the links to the town centre and all the facilities, including the school. But Cumbria Highways are content and happy that these arrangements can be safeguarded through planning condition and also through their Section 278 arrangements. Of note, the National Planning Policy Framework states development should only be prevented or refused on highway grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impacts on the network would be severe. Cumbria Highways are satisfied that the highway arrangements are acceptable. In brief, going through residential amenity, I've mentioned about the cut and fill, which again, I flag up on this next slide. And this is important because, as I've mentioned, Pringle is set down on the eastern boundary, and it's important as well on that top northern edge, the top of the slope, that the dwellings are set down low, so as not to have an adverse impact on Mart Close, and also to reduce the impact in terms of the landscape character. Officers are content that the actual separation distance are satisfactory, with side boundaries more than 12 metres between the actual gable boundaries to properties on Pringle, and there are good separation distances from Mart Close, I think more than 27 metres. In terms of noise residential amenity, noise was also an issue that was picked up by Sports England, but there has been continuous sound level monitoring conducted over a number of days to establish the typical acoustic environment during the daytime and nighttime period. And for the operational phase, it's considered that any noise increase or noise matters in the locality would be negligible or low risk. So, for example, the actual road noise is very low, and officers are of a view that any noise coming from the pitch would likely be really quite intermittent. However, on the southern boundary, in the mark of good practice, it is recommended by planning condition that in terms of means of ventilation, that could be considered. So you don't have essentially windows more open on that southern boundary, where you could get intermittent noise from the rugby pitch. But generally, normal type windows would suffice throughout the development and would be quite within noise limits and expectations for residential amenity. For the construction phase, we would expect noise levels to be controlled, and that can be addressed as part of the construction management plan. Members are also advised that such a plan could limit construction hours and also include mitigation, such as to address concerns over dust and other matters when the site is being built out. So, in terms of Sports England amenity issues, we considered Bull Strike. My understanding is there is only one company that does Bull Strike nationally, and there is endeavours to get that Bull Strike report undertaken to address whether netting is required behind the posts or what boundary infrastructure is required to relieve any impact from Bull Strike. In terms of the floodlights, again, this is a matter that Sports England did express concern over, but it is officers' view that the angle and intensity of these lights are very directional, and officers have a view that it's not of great significance in the overall balance of considerations, but is a relatively minor matter that we could consider through delegation if that was resolved. In terms of landscape character and visual impact, I've mentioned it's a sloping site, elevated slight, but really will be seen within the context of the existing buildings, the telephone exchange, the Spatria Rugby Club, Pringle, and properties known as to the north of the site. So officers are content that in terms of the wider landscape and visual effects are satisfactory, and there would be no indications that the impact on the landscape would be such of a magnitude as to result refusal of this application. The other matter that Sports England raised was flood risk, as did Network Rail. As part of this scheme, I'll just take you back to the drainage plan. Again, just to reiterate on this, you've got this surface water arrangement that would link into the existing infrastructure that crosses that southern boundary of the Spatria training pitch. There are certain technical details that do need to be resolved, as I've mentioned, but these are matters that can be addressed, and it is also noted that the rugby club are not objecting to the proposal, although those drainage arrangements would cross their land. Officers consider that further clarity to Sports England will result in the objections not being sustained, but in the meantime, the recommendation to members is to delegate the grant of planning permission to officers, subject to this and other Sports England raised issues being resolved. I will address that later in terms of potential recommendation. So moving on towards the end of the actual presentation, in terms of contamination and land stability, there are no indications the land is unsuitable for residential development. Matters relating to contamination and land stability can be secured by planning condition. It has been noticed that there was a small water feature and well that is to the western edge of the site, but that has been noted as part of the actual technical reports that have been provided. In terms of heritage, policy S27 of the local plan, as we've previously mentioned, there are no objections from Cumbria Archaeology, and really the site is considered archaeologically sterile, although further investigations in terms of archaeology can be secured by planning condition. In terms of neighbour concerns regarding loss of wildlife and ecology, policy 35 is applicable, but officers are of the view that there is no red squirrel habitat on the site and no evidence of badger activity. And also because the fields surrounding the actual site are very much cut off by the rugby club pitches, it is unlikely that you're going to get brown hare and barn owl on that site. As I mentioned in the site layout plan, the trees will be retained. And in terms of protection of the trees around the boundary of the site, because there are a number of larger trees, particularly to the northern boundary, I think plots 51 and 52, and then on the eastern boundary, there are some large trees, and there is a planning condition set out that would seek to protect those trees during construction activities. So in terms of balance and conclusions, there are no material considerations which would suggest that a decision could be made contrary to parts 1 and 2 of the that should be made to the plan. Sorry, I'll start again. There are no material considerations which suggest that a decision should be made contrary to the plan parts 1 and 2 of Allerdale local plan, in that the scheme is largely considered in accordance with local plans part 1 and 2. The site is inside the part 2 settlement limits, and the site is an allocated site under policy SA15. The residential use is compatible with the prevailing residential uses and at a density commensurate with this edge of settlement location, with plot ratios and densities that echo the prevailing residential estates within Espatria. The proposed dwellings are considered appropriate in terms of design and massing and will assimilate into the setting with low harm. So, with this in mind, although there has been the minor matter of the lack of the M43 compliance, I think officers consider that given the substantial benefits arising from the proposal and the fact that this is an allocated site and the outstanding matters are relatively minor, officers consider that it is appropriate to bring the application before members with a positive recommendation detailed below. And what officers are recommending is that there could be delegated authority or to delegate the granting of permission subject to conditions that have been detailed in Annex 1 of the report, and any required response to matters 1 to 4 that were set out to the planning and building control manager or head of service upon. And those resolutions relate to the completion and signing of a Section 106 legal agreement securing 6 affordable housing units, that's 3 for social rent, 3 for low cost home ownership, and maintenance of public open space and play area. Those are matters that could be addressed through a Section 106. But also a resolution that there will be outstanding issues addressed that have been set out by Sports England and Network Rail pertaining to the off-site surface water drainage system, and the resolution of the outstanding matter relating to the ball strike issue from the Espatria training pitch. And also to consider in more detail any potential concerns with regard to floodlight glare. Also on the late list, I also want to bring your attention that a further planning condition is thought appropriate, and that would be for the play area details to be submitted for approval to the local planning authority and implemented prior to the occupation of the 30th dwelling. And those details, as I've set out in that resolution 1, would be safeguarded in terms of maintenance in perpetuity through the Section 106 legal agreement. So that is the officer report. We do have 2 speakers, and I have various slides on the screen. So if we could start to bring them into the debate.
Thank you. Over to Lee to process the speakers.
Thank you. First speaker is Ryan Fisher. Ryan, if you want to come up to the microphone, you'll have 5 minutes to address the panel, and just let us know when you're ready. Thank you.
Remember to select your microphone.
Yep. Okay. Can you? Yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I've come just to, well, I basically start by reading my original objection, which was on the website. Some of this blanked off, sorry. Yeah, submission objection. Comments. After looking at the plans of the Allerdale website, we strongly object to the proposal development of 65 homes on Station Road, Espatria. Our concerns as follows. We own a neighbouring property, which at least 7 of the properties meet our boundary, which is the northern boundary, which we own and need to maintain, buildings, hedges, trees, etc. The proposed plan leaves no access because the gardens come right up to the boundary, which makes this impossible. And that's the part I was wanting to speak about, really. There hasn't been much mention on the northern boundary, but all other boundaries seem to have been mentioned by Rebecca there. So I just wanted to point out, on the policy of the SA15 ALPP2, I think it's section J. Okay. Yeah, I'll just read J and K. Careful consideration will need to be given to the relationship with adjoining residential properties and the unadopted lane in Pringle. And K states, layout and design will need to consider the relationship of proposed residential properties with the adjoining rugby club premises and the B2 use site, which adopts the northern boundary of the site, which is commercial property, which I own, and we own the boundary, so we're concerned about maintenance and noise, really, because the houses are quite close, and with the boundary gardens coming up to the boundary, we struggle to maintain, which is hard enough as it is, as the access is through the field, which has been wet, so it doesn't always get done, obviously, because of the condition of the field. So that's one of the points. The other thing was that you mentioned cut and fill is proposed, and that's section, well, it's 12.24, and I believe you've got the thing on the screen. The northern boundary, which from the top right-hand corner to 3/4 the way, at least across, is our boundary, and we were also concerned if you were lowering the levels, that'll give us make it even more impossible to maintain. Plus, encroaching on residents' gardens, which virtually makes this impossible. From what I can see, I have tried to contact developers and councillors and things, but so far I've had no response. So it's just one of my main concerns. You seem to have covered quite a few of the others in what you've already mentioned. The other thing I was going to mention, which hadn't really occurred to me, but you mentioned ecology, where there was a, sorry, you're going to have to bear with me. I'm not, 12.52. Which you've already read about red squirrels on the site. No evidence of badger activity, as the field is surrounded by housing to the north and the rugby club to the south, and the field is largely cut off from the countryside to the south and is unlikely to be regularly used by brown hare or barn owl, which I happen to know is not the case, as we have 2 resident barn owls, which often frequent my buildings. I don't see them as much as I used to, but quite regularly. So I don't tell people about that for obvious reasons, but that was just another thing I thought I would mention.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. That's your 5 minutes. But if you can remain seated, what we're going to do is throw the floor open to councillors to ask you any questions they feel appropriate, and if you feel like answering them.
Yes.
Okay. So, have I any questions from councillors? Councillor Fairbrother.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher, for the information. Can you be a little bit more specific? What are the sort of things that need to be taken care of on the boundaries between your commercial building and the new estate that's planned to be built? What kind of things do you have to do at the moment?
Well, example, last summer, we had to erect a scaffold to re-render the building, which there is another one to do. Access to repairing roofs, that's just the building side. We have the hedges to cut, trees to maintain. The fence is located on our side of the hedge, so we can manage that. But obviously, with fences, with trees and buildings, if there's no space, you know, if that's in somebody's garden, obviously it's extremely difficult.
Any follow-ups, Councillor Fairweather?
So what sort of solution would you be looking for should the estate go ahead?
Well, I mean, I did, before I objected, try to contact developers to discuss this matter. I thought it wouldn't have to get to this stage. But after many phone calls and many messages and many promises of bringing me back, it never happened. Well, we were hoping that possibly leave an access gap between garden and our, you know, so obviously we can maintain that. And plus, I'm sure that residential houses won't want my hedges to you know, it's up to me to maintain hedges and things, trees, which I did hear that they were going to trim or something. I'm not sure. So that was.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fairweather. Any more questions? Councillor McCuckin.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Fisher. Just to ask further on that, within your deeds.
Yes.
Because on certain deeds, sometimes there is a 6-foot gap between hedges and fences and things like that. So is that not showing up on your deeds?
Well, the deeds states that I must maintain and provide a stock-proof barrier, which obviously it states we have to maintain.
Just some advice from.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Sorry, I was going to come back after the questions finished. Just so members to be advised. Obviously, I'm just very passionate about this particular matter. The question of deeds and the rights of access to that boundary, that's not a planning consideration. So it's not a matter you can take into account today. Thank you.
I withdraw that question then, Chair. Thank you.
Yep. 1, 2. Okay, everyone happy with that? Councillor Fairbrother.
Just wanted to ask a question about the ecology, because I read that paragraph and I thought, well, who knows whether there's brown hares in the field because they're very quiet and shy. But you said about the barn owls. So how long have they been nesting in your building?
Can you use your microphone, please? I would like to hear.
Sorry, it's gone off. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, well, we moved there in June 2013, and there were residents then. There was 2 barn owls, a light and a dark one, which were in the buildings most days. Obviously, because of security, we've had to change windows and things like that. So reluctantly, we had to kind of stop them getting in. But they do come in occasionally, and quite often of a night we do see them flying over, which is nice to see, to be quite honest.
Got a follow-up, Councillor Fairbrother? Okay. Anybody else? Any other questions from the councillors? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fisher. You may take your seat.
Thank you.
The next speaker today, supported by Rachel Lightfoot, is David Wright, representing the applicant. Thank you. Yeah, just let us know when you're ready, David, and we'll give you 5 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, just there's some slides as well. I think Claire was there. There you go. All right, excellent. Yeah, ready to go. Yep. Good afternoon, Chair. So my name is David Wright. I'm Land Director for Gleeson Homes. It's nice to finally be back in person for planning committees to see a few new faces, but I've recognised some of you before from Zoom calls over the last 12 months or so. So for those who haven't met me before, Gleeson Homes are building on 78 sites across the UK. We build predominantly homes for first-time buyers, and we don't sell to buy-to-let landlords. We sell to those people who actually need to get onto the housing ladder and buy their first home. We look to build on land that others don't usually make viable, and 9 times out of 10, our homes are more affordable than the local rental prices. Our buyers are typically 85% of them are first-time buyers. The average age of our purchasers are 29 years old. They have an average combined household income of £24,000, and 89% of our customers are either moving out from the parents' home or moving out of rented accommodation. So in Cumbria, you can see on the screen there, we've got 7 sites that are open now, 2 of them in Allerdale. This potentially could be the 3rd site in Allerdale. And this is from a standing start of starting in Cumbria in 2018. So Cumbria is a really big area for us and something we're looking forward to moving into. Just go on to the next slide, please. So yeah, this is the site itself and its relationship to Aspatria. Plan as an allocated housing site. I mentioned before about affordable homes. They are truly affordable, whether that's on the open market, whether it's affordable rentable properties or discounted properties, which are open to first-time buyers. And you will see on the screen there's the rugby club just to the south of the site, which Rebecca mentioned, and they no longer object to this scheme. There's an explanation about where Sports England are at the moment, and I'm happy to answer any questions on how that will move forward following any decision that's made by members today. Next slide, please. So just the layout itself based on our landscaping plan. I won't go over it too much. Obviously, Rebecca's went into the detail there, but you can see towards the centre of the site, there's some existing mature trees that are there. So Rebecca encourages to retain them because they support wildlife, it increases biodiversity, and just provides that attractive part of the site where you'd have public open space. And towards the bottom of the site there, you can see the attenuation basin. That will improve off-site surface water drainage. It also, again, increases the biodiversity in the local area. Just on that note, and obviously, the objector mentioned before as well about wildlife in the area. So we've done an ecological appraisal of the entire site to make sure that we're not going to be harming any protected species, and also would be subject to any sort of legislation outside of the Planning Act as well. Next slide, please. This is just a way to sort of demonstrate how affordable our homes are based on what's going on in the local market. There is no real rental market within Aspatria itself, so we pick the closest houses we can find to Aspatria. But rather than go through it line by line, for example, our 3-bedroom detached home with Help to Buy, you'd be £104 a week mortgage repayments. In comparison, that's cheaper than renting a 2-bedroom terrace, 3-bedroom terrace, or a 3-bedroom semi-detached property within the local area. And again, sometimes we forget about it being from Cumbria, but again, if you look at that view and what you get for that, as well as the view, having the new build homes that we're building, more energy efficient. And we now have a date from government. So from June 23 onwards, homes are going to be a lot more energy efficient than they are now, which is a big important factor for us and for our buyers. Next slide, please. So the economic benefits of the scheme, there's going to be 6.52 million investment from ourselves into local labour, goods and services that's going to reciprocate throughout the local economy. We're going to be creating or sustaining 68 jobs directly in terms of building the site out. And then another 133 jobs will be created or sustained indirectly through the supply chain. There's be benefits to the council in terms of new homes bonus, council tax receipts as well, which I've mentioned there. But again, I think the most important thing is 52 of these homes are projected to be going to first-time buyers. Next slide, please. Yeah, so final slide from me. Obviously, a lot of details have already been addressed by Rebecca, and I'd like to thank Rebecca and Simon for all the work they've done on the planning application itself. And I hope you can support a scheme that's sensitively designed, provides homes for first-time buyers and key workers. It's going to create a lot of jobs and investment in the local area, supports the local infrastructure, and will be supported by all the statutory consultees once Sports England have removed that objection too. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Thank you for your presentation. Right, questions from the floor? Councillor Fairbrother.
Oh, I must be the only one who's awake. Thank you very much for your presentation, and I was impressed also with the Ashfield Road presentation. But I'm curious to know, it's great for first-time buyers, but what happens when that first-time buyer expects to sell that house more than they paid for it? Therefore, the next lot of owners come along. How will they be then first-time buyers if it's more expensive? Don't quite see how it's sustainable in the long term.
Is that in relation to the open market properties? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I suppose it's a good point and it's a good question. So I mean, if we're not providing a scheme that's 100% affordable homes with a capital A, that would be the only way you could guarantee that there's going to be an ability for people in the future always to be able to get on the housing ladder. What I would say is that on our open market properties, we have a good mix. So we have 2-bedroom bungalows, we have 2-bedroom semi-detached houses, as well as the larger 3-bedroom semis, 3-bed detached and 4-bedroom detached. So we do that for 2 reasons. One's, if I'm honest, selfish in terms of that's what the market dictates, and we know that's the mix that would work within this location based on our market research. But it also ensures that these homes are sustainable in the long term. So the 2-bedroom semis, for example, they're not suitable for a large family or for people who want that additional space with, you know, maybe 3 or 4 kids. But where they are really useful for is those first-time buyers, be it on brand new home as it would be if the scheme was passed, or if it then goes through the cycle of a home with these days where it might be sold again or again in the future. So that home, due to its, although it's going to be a new build home, although it's going to have more energy efficiency than existing properties, it is going to be more affordable than us building a lot of large properties on there, which would, without doubt, I'm sure, keep those homes out of reach of people who are trying to get on the housing ladder in the local area. What we'd like to see is people who might move away from the Space Tria, stay in the Space Tria. There's homes there for them which are suitable for them, and you know, they're right next door to the town centre, the rugby club, and everything else. So it's those people that might often overlook a Space Tria that see that in the future, even once we're finished, that there's homes that are suitable and modern for them and their needs at the time.
Would you like a follow-up there, Councillor Fairbrother? Okay. Councillor Kemp? Then okay. Councillor Daniels.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, lad. You're stating there 52 homes for first-time buyers. You know, generally, first-time buyers are people that's setting off in life, trying to raise a family, you know. Do you think these properties are really going to be beneficial to Space Tria? And do you think that probably the local schools, and you know, Space Tria hasn't got much going for it, the Bacon Hill School probably has places, the secondary school. I don't think that the infant school, the junior school, will be able to cope if we do get a lot of families in there. Can you give us some idea on what your thoughts are on, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Councillor. So when the planning application goes in, the county council, the local education authority, they have for want of a better word, a formula which sort of predicts the amount of school children that would be produced by the development. Now, I mentioned before that we're predominantly focused on those first-time buyers, and a lot of our buyers won't necessarily have a family with them in that first instance. Having said that, the county council put aside our business model and just look at it from a straight point of view. So if you're providing a 2-bedroom semi-detached home, it generates a prediction of how many kids might be living in that home, which is not many. Obviously, once you get to a 4-bedroom detached home, I think there's a presumption there that there's normally, I think, 2.5 children or something like that within that property. And as I've said before, our buyers don't normally have the same number of children if you're on a bigger scheme where it's more focused on executive housing for maybe people that have, you know, got a job down the road at Sellafield or somewhere like that. But to use the closest local example I can give you is we've got a scheme in West Cumbria that's up and running now in Egremont, across the border in Copeland. And out of the 17 people that reserved the property on that site, 15 of them are first-time buyers. Some of those first-time buyers do have families with them as well, but they've focused on those 4-bedroom detached properties. So our 4-bedroom detached properties will be underneath the Help to Buy cap within the Northwest, which is £224,000. That enables them to be more affordable to them. And what we often see, especially with moving to a new market like Cumbria, you might have someone who's came into our show home to look at a 3-bedroom detached property or 3-bedroom semi-detached property, and then they quickly realise actually it's affordable for them to go to the bigger properties, 4-bed detached properties. So there will be less, based on our experience elsewhere, there'll be less school children coming to the development initially than there would be elsewhere. There will be there in the future. And I think it's a chicken and the egg situation. I think to get investment into the primary school and the secondary school in Aspatrià, it helps having these people come forward. In this instance, there's enough capacity within both schools to provide what's going on in the development. But if there's another scheme in the future in the town from ourselves or another developer, it maybe then there's a need to sort of provide that additional classroom split space. But that's not the case right now.
Would you like a follow-up there, Councillor Kemp?
Yeah. Well, I can agree with some of your points, but I mean, to me, you're going to have houses with people that's not going to have families, to me, the development really should be built.
Councillor Kemp, can you ask a question, please?
I'm sorry, I made that comment.
I understand where you're coming from. I think, again, using a local development in West Cumbria as an example, so in that one we had, for example, a football team nearby, and like 3 young lads, one heard they could get home, and the other 2 then will try and get home there as well. So they'll be looking for their first time home, and they might live in it for 5 years and move on to a different house. But within that scheme, if they've got a bit more money or there's an opportunity for them to get a bigger house, some of these people might be going there as a single lad playing the football team, but then they might have the opportunity in the future to stay there if it suits their needs, wants to, settle down, start a family and everything else.
Are you satisfied with that, Councillor Kemp? Councillor Daniels? Can you switch your microphone on, Alan?
It's on now. What provisions have you made for electrical charging points, both for residents and for guests? I understand you've got some guest parking provisions. So given that there will be no manufacturing of diesel, petrol, or even hybrid cars after 35, what have you got for the residents?
That's a good point, Councillor. I know this is something we've discussed as a planning committee, or when I came to the planning committee before in the past as well. And since then, there's a lot more information available from the government. So in terms of the energy efficiency of the homes in general, we know from June 23, once the foundations and slabs are put down at properties, those properties will in the future have to be a lot more compliant with the energy efficiency requirements the government have put forward. And the plan is to do the exact same thing with electric car charging points. The legislation is, we now know, coming out in October this year. It could be as soon as April or not, it could be the April after, where you've then got to start under the building regulations, provide electric car charging points. So there's no specific planning policy in Allerdale requesting car charging points. But and at the moment, there's nothing in the planning process on this application to secure that. But we've already done the calculation, and we know that there's going to be approximately, at the very most, to be 10 properties that will not have electric car charging points. The rest of them, we would have to do that through the government legislation. As an aside, I was on a site of ours in Carlisle last week where Carlisle local plan insists on us providing the car charging points. And what I've seen is, again, with our buyers being predominantly first-time buyers, their sole focus was getting on the housing ladder. So a lot of them got your traditional diesel, petrol engines. And yet you've got these brand new car charging points outside the houses. And it did stand out, and you did notice there wasn't anyone being able to take opportunity of it. But on this scheme in Aspatrià, it will be future-proofed effectively. And even though some of the people right now might not be interested in those electric cars or hybrid cars, that they'll be able to have that facility to charge them in the future.
A chance for reply.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Councillor McGuckin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. As the average house price is going up, and we've talked about affordable housing, you're going to put 6 in, 3 of which are 50-50 and 3 of which are rentals. Why only 6 then out of 65?
So just repeat the question again, councillor.
As you are building 65 houses and the 6 affordables, 3 of which will be 50-50, 3 will be rental, why is it only then 10% of the 65 affordable?
Yeah, sorry, I just didn't quite catch that region. Yes, so in your local plan, there's different provisions of how many forms have to be affordable with capital A throughout it. So it sort of differs throughout different areas of Allerdale. So for example, in Cockermouth, the demand for affordable homes is considered higher than somewhere like Spatria. So in Spatria, it's 10% of the site should be affordable. And of that, there's then normally a split between 50-50 between what would be affordable rent and what would be discounted sale. So 80% of the open market value. We've complied with that, but also just noting that our homes are on the open market as well. We'd be confident that just based on what we've done on all the other sites in Cumbria, the vast majority of those purchases will be first-time buyers.
Yeah, just to follow up, will the rentals then be part of a housing association?
There would be, councillor, yes. We've had a quote from a local housing provider and factored that into our budget as well.
Thank you, Councillor McGuckin. Councillor Fairbrother.
I notice on the plans it's quite disappointing that you're expecting that people could walk up the path for Pringles and they could access the primary school and secondary school. So what's your view on the new footpath that's going to go on the left-hand side of the access, and then children will still have to cross the road to get up a steep hill to go to both schools? Do you think we should be looking for something a bit safer than that?
To be frank, I was disappointed we can't deliver an access through Pringle. I mean, it's legal reasons out of our control, but Rebecca quite rightly at the beginning says this is an opportunity, can provide that link. But because there is no definitive owner of Pringle, it's something that we can't deliver through the scheme. So the alternative is then going across Station Road itself, and then we just take on board everything that the County Council as the Highways Authority provide. What they want to make sure is, as well as doing what's referred to as 278 works that Rebecca referred to, provide the footpath that then integrate into Station Road itself, they'd want to make sure there's a drop curb and there's easy access. They can cross Station Road at that point and then go up into the town centre itself. So it's, yeah, we'll just, whatever the County Council need us to do on that, we'll do effectively.
Councillor Fairbrother.
Thank you. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Anybody else? We've got Councillor Tyson, then Councillor McGuckin.
Thank you for your presentation.
Can you move your microphone just a bit closer, Alan?
Yeah. Thank you for your presentation. I just wondered, when you've been before us previously, you were quite firm with regard to not adhering to the aspects of climate change and sustainability that were in our part two local plan. Has your attitude changed towards this?
There's two things. So I like to think personally we'll always do as much as we can as possible within the market that we're in, trying to be as sustainable as possible. The company was awarded like a national award for being one of the most sustainable PLCs a few years ago. What that doesn't always correlate into is having that low carbon footprint in building homes. We do build homes using traditional build methods such as bricks and mortar, but there's always a balance between, if you'd went for something that was purely, say, modular or something that was considered a more modern form of construction, it would also take jobs away from that local supply chain, which is something we've always pushed back on. The main thing that's changed, I would say, since we've last sort of spoke on a couple of sites more recently, is the government has now set up that timetable where, whether we're a willing partner or not, we will be providing homes where there's going to be a 30% reduction in carbon emissions by June 2023. The slabs that go in at that point have to make sure there's that 30% reduction in carbon emissions. Now, what we've chosen to do as a company is, rather than wait to the second set of regulations to come in 2026, we're looking to implement those rules and change the regulations straight away from June 23. So, for example, any homes that we will be building from June 23 onwards, it's our intention to make sure they're an air source heat pump, for example, rather than use your traditional sort of gas boilers. So there's a lot of changes coming in on a scheme like this, knowing that we've got to work with Sports England to get the work that they need to be done out of the way, to get a legal agreement between ourselves and Allerdale to show affordable homes. We're not going to be starting on site problems.
Years later, by government requirement, is in fact quite serious. And to be quite honest, I do think 2025 is too late to start doing up houses.
Councillor Tyson, can you ask the question, please?
Right. So my question is there any chance of Gleeson's bringing this forward earlier?
Yeah, in short, Councillor, yes. So we'll be bringing this forwards, and we're not going to be waiting to that final date to bring things in, such as air source heat pumps and things like that, to make properties more sustainable. I think you mentioned it about something in the report that the Town Council said as well. And they picked up on disparities between, say, wages in Copeland and wages in Allerdale, and the affordability of homes in Allerdale compared to Copeland. What I would say on those figures, that they're very misleading. In that what they're generated from is Sellafield down the road. Now, as we all know, it doesn't necessarily mean because Sellafield are paying out wages in Copeland that those wages go to Copeland. The two main benefactors are Copeland and Allerdale, without a doubt. But as an example, most of your line managers who work in Sellafield live in Cockermouth. Some of the ones on really big money don't even live in West Cumbria, and they probably do it remotely from God knows where throughout the rest of the country, particularly these days, when everything's become a lot more virtual. So that's sometimes misleading, so it's based on the wages that are generated within Allerdale itself. Allerdale's got a tourism industry, which proportionally normally sort of reduces that wage that's there. But also using a Spatriot example, you've got good, well-paid jobs within the town itself. There's a lot of sort of employment going on, and which is above its weight compared to the towns of a similar size throughout Cumbria. And those employees are on the doorstep. And that in itself makes it Spatriot a lot more sustainable location to build homes than somewhere where everyone's going to have to commute to work, or you're just relying on those people that have those type of jobs where they can do them, sitting from home.
Yes, okay, thank you. Yes, I'd just like to point out that these aren't managers living in Cockermouth who've been around perhaps, well into it. These are first-time buyers. And the situation is a little bit different at the lower end of the scale.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And that's why our home...
Councillor Tyson, I think we're entering into a debate here. Is there a question you're going to follow up with that?
No, I just wanted to make that final point.
I know this is a question. Right. Councillor Bainbridge, please.
Councillor Scott.
Chair, I think you mean Councillor Harrington.
Apologies, Councillor Harrington. I knew it was Councillor Harrington.
Right. Thank you very much, Chair. Hello there. I'm very interested in your ecology and the saving of energy, and one thing that all very, very noble of you. But I'd like to ask you, any of your houses got solar panels to for the electricity?
They won't know. So one of the things we're looking to bring in is the air source heat pumps, but that gives you, you make the properties a lot more energy efficient by bringing in the air source heat pumps than you will by the solar panels. And that's the case throughout the UK. But as you'll all know, it's probably even more so within the climate that we have in Cumbria. They're an obvious example of bringing down those carbon emissions, but they're not as productive and as efficient as.
But there's new solar panels now that do all what you said. Have you not thought about installing those on your properties? That was my question.
I think without a doubt, as we move to carbon neutral homes, there must be a place for solar panels then. But for that first kind of reduction, the main focus is on making the actual way that the energy is produced is more efficient itself.
Yeah, but it's more cost effective to the tenant as well, or the house owner, isn't it?
And I think where solar panels will work really well is where you've got maybe sort of executive houses with bigger footprints. So you might have a large property with a bigger roof, then there's sort of more capacity for them. But yeah, can
I just put a stop to that? I think what we're doing is entering into a casual debate here. Can we have some clear, precise questions?
The question was, do you intend to install solar panels? That was my question.
Sorry, what was the question again?
The question was, do you intend to install solar panels, the new style, on your new properties? Thank you.
We will be, but not as shortly as the air source heat pumps. So I think the air source heat pumps are more prevalent within this scheme than solar panels.
Thank you, Councillor Harrington. Who else had their hand up there? Well, Councillor Scott and then Councillor McGuckin.
Aye. Just a quick one, really. Were you aware that Mr. Fisher had tried to make contact with you regarding the hedge? And if so, was there any response?
I wasn't, no, and what I'm happy to do regardless, give the number later on, because it may be just bad luck with the pandemic and everything else, and people not working in the office and working everywhere, that maybe some wires are being crossed. But I just did check my emails before to see if there's any contact with myself directly, but there wasn't. But that doesn't mean that he has done. That means it's probably went to a call centre in our head office in Sheffield or something like that, and it hasn't got through to me. But I do apologise for that. And yeah, I'm happy to get the number off him later on.
Councillor Scott, are you happy with that?
No, thank you. That's fine.
Okay. Councillor McGuckin.
Thank you, yeah, thank you, David. Can you tell me then what is the percentage model of the local supply chain then? Thank you.
It varies from site to site. All we can say is that our main focus is using local contractors. So as an example, our main sort of non-contractor is based, contractor is based in Workington. So we always look to get local people in, and that's the main focus. It would vary from site to site, so I wouldn't be able to give you enough to get planning permission at Spatria.
Simon, you wanted to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I know a number of members' questions have been very worthy questions about the environment and sustainability. And yes, members, you'll create the policy S2 of the local plan part 1 has the sustainability principles. But I just would caution members. I know you're questioning the applicant on matters. There are in Allerdale there's no local plan policy that actually requires any particular provision. For example, photovoltaic cells on the roof. Councillor Harrington was asking that question, or I think Councillor Daniels was asking about electric vehicle charging points, etc. So it's, although they're very worthy questions, to be clear about actually the specifics of this application today, and in advance of any local plan having policies with regard to those matters, it is not a reasonable requirement for the applicant. to provide things like photovoltaic cells or electric charging points. You could afford weight in the overall balance to such a provision. They're not being provided in this instance, and there's no policy conflict with their absence because there isn't a policy requiring them. So just to be mindful of that. I know you're asking these questions with very good intentions, members, but I would caution you and remind you that the local plan, your own local plan, doesn't actually have any policy requirements for these provisions. And that also includes, for example, with regard to supply chain and sourcing materials. Again, it's a very worthy question you're asking, members, but there's no requirement in your planning policy for that to happen. Just while we're on just if I could come back, Chair, on just another matter with regard to the open market housing. Obviously, there's no planning controls with regard to open market housing once they're on the open market in terms of who can buy, who can occupy those properties. So again, you've heard from the applicant with regard to their good intentions about not selling it for buy to let, etc. But we couldn't secure that through the planning system for the open market housing. There's got these 6 affordable houses, which I think Councillor McGuckin was referring to in one of his questions. And the 6 is there because of policy SA3 of the local plan, part 2, and Aspatria being in the 10% zone. And 6 is rounding down 10% of 65. And in Allerdale, rounding down is the recognised approach. Not in all councils, but in Allerdale it is. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. Any more questions? Right, I'm going to hand it back now to Rebecca, which I think is the stage of the process now for you to respond to any of the objectors' responses or indeed the applicant.
Okay, so with regard to the northern boundary, I think, was it Mr. Fisher originally, and his concerns, there will be a retaining wall, an engineered retaining wall to that northern boundary, and details have been provided of that retaining wall. There is something called the Third Party Wall Act. So in terms of maintenance, under sort of common law, he would be able to maintain his boundary in perpetuity. There have been cross-section drawings provided showing the actual first floor levels of the properties on that northern edge. And then there is a slight retaining wall, and then a further slope, and then a larger retaining wall at the back, which is an engineered retaining wall. But clearly there was going to be further discussion between Mr. Fisher and the actual developer. Obviously, you know, he's a neighbour through the course of the development. In terms of the ecological reports, there have been a full ecological survey undertaken. It has been set out in terms of local knowledge that there are various protected species within the site. With regard to any protected bird species, I think as it's been set out previously, in addition to any planning policy, there are the Wildlife Acts, and any harm to any protected species would be protected through the various wildlife laws. So in terms of the other matters regarding separation distances, I think I covered those within the report in terms of offset distances, although Mr. Ryan has expressed concern about the proximity of the bungalows. I think there's 2 bungalows adjacent to his property and then a number of detached dwellings. Officers are of view that, you know, there is still good separation distance between those properties and that boundary where there will be an engineered retaining wall. I think that was all the key issues that were raised during that that debate.
Thank you, Rebecca. And questions from the floor for the officers? Councillor Lynch. Can you switch on your microphone?
Sorry. Bottom of page 58, top of 59, it's the highway, the entrance from the site onto the highway on Station Road. And the photograph we've got there, the displays are going to be 43 metres. Is that 43 metres either side? Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yes, that would be secured by planning condition. There would be a minimum of 43 metres on either side visibility displays, and that can be secured.
And then when you come out, yeah, that's the picture. When you come out and you're going left out of the entrance. No, yes, yeah, the one where when you're coming out of the entrance, you're going down left towards the station, and that's where the pavement is going to be. Is that correct? And that sign for the rugby club, I presume that will not be there. That will be, and then when you get down to the dropped crossing, will that go straight across, or will there be an island in the centre?
Yeah, to respond to that, my understanding is there would be no island in the centre. It would just be the dropped curve and then the crossing across. That based on the recommendation from Cumbria Highways.
Councillor Fairbrother.
Thank you. I'm a bit concerned about on page 75. It's all about the compliance with the space standards. I think it's M43. And it says that at 12.13 that our policy states that we should take a flexible approach to these requirements, and where the applicant can demonstrate there will be a significant harm the financial viability of the scheme. Then the next paragraph, it says there's no viability appraisal has been provided. Don't you think we should ask for that viability appraisal, because we've not mentioned at all elderly population who might wish to buy a small one-bedroom house and want wheelchair access. So I'm just wondering if that's been requested.
In response to that, I think I've set out in the report and during my presentation on the balance in this scheme in terms of this being an allocated site and all the benefits that have been brought for this site. It is acknowledged that it isn't compliant with that element of that particular policy SA5 of the Allerdale local plan, I think it is, and therefore that is something for you to consider. But officers are of the view that taking a balanced view of the scheme, the benefits of the scheme are such that on this occasion that we are taking a more flexible approach, acknowledging as well that the site, although there isn't a viability assessment, it is a sloping site, it's not a greenfield site, and they are providing, which essentially has issues in terms of foundations, and also the fact that you've got your sustainable urban drainage scheme and other mitigation is required in terms of that wider drainage. So as I think it's set out in paragraph 12.14, in officers' minds, the application should not fall on this one discordance alone. And I think that is the sort of recommendation coming from planning officers.
Councillor Fairbrother.
Oh, I'm just thinking about it. Thank you.
Councillor Kemp.
Okay, thank you. Could I just ask the officers to really put the slide on with a view to the top of the hill for the pedestrian access, please? And the pedestrian, that's the one, yeah. Can somebody really just point out where this crossing would be to the other side? A bit concerned about, no, not that one, sorry, no. Yeah, well, I think really, you know, that's okay, put the crossing in there because it takes the corner out of the equation. But, you know, I would like to make people aware that people who's crossing from this new development, and we've also got another development behind that wall of 34 houses, they're going to be walking uphill on the left-hand side. When they get to the top of that hill, most of the school children and people who's going to walk up there have then got to cross the road back over again, you know. Are we going to put a crossing up near the very busy junction on the A596? Thank you.
When I've actually, if I take my mask off, when I've actually looked at the photographs, and we'll go, you can see on King Street, there are various crossings on King Street. So that's a crossing at the moment, and I think that's what you're mentioning, how you've got to cross again to get across the road. But I think there's crossings further up as well, on the other side of the road, higher up on the street. I mean, this is a situation, unfortunately, with regard to, if I look at this particular photograph here, there isn't room for a pavement on that eastern flank of the actual station road. So the only route to the town centre, and I think it is reasonable that the route to the town centre, because you actually arrive in the town centre, is that there would be a route into the town centre via the existing footway on the left-hand side, because it cannot be accommodated on that right-hand side.
I think Councillor Kemp, if I refer members to 12.22 in the officer's report, which is on page 77, I think it is. You know, we do as officers accept that, you know, you're right, you come out of the site, you'd have to drop down the hill a few yards, then cross the road on the new crossing, and then walk up the hill on the footway, and then if you're going, you know, down to the co-op or whatever, you'd then have to cross, you know, the road again at the top of the hill to walk down the footway. So that is accepted, and it's similar to the response to Councillor Fairbrother with the M43 compliance. You know, there are issues with that. It would have been far better to have the access through Pringle, but that's not land in the applicant's or the authority's control. So it has to be something that you'd have to weigh up as councillors as to whether you feel those matters are of sufficient concern to withhold planning permission. But I would just remind members that it is an allocated site, albeit for 60 dwellings rather than 65. But it is a site that's been tested through the local plan process with consultation through an inquiry. And, you know, it is the aim of the council to have growth and development in our towns, and especially as high up there in the hierarchy in policy S3, to sustain those towns, and the impact on infrastructure and its location within the town has been tested in that local plan process. So, and I think most members will probably recall when we had the application at Broughton Moor by the same developer, and it's similar considerations apply. You know, it's very easy in viability terms to deliver housing in places like Cockermouth or Stainburn or Seaton. It's more challenging because of viability to deliver housing in Aspatria or Broughton Moor. Here's an allocation which, you know, to fulfil the council's strategic objectives in our own local plan, we need to bring forward. So to do that, there are those compromises. As Rebecca says, it's that balancing exercise that you have to make. we clearly as officers feel that that balance is, you know, heavily in favour of supporting the proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Semple.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm looking at the Town Council's comments, Rebecca, some of which have been mentioned already. I think Councillor Kemp asked about the schools, for instance, but by the way, they mentioned the Pringle, and you know, and I feel like I know the Pringle now. I didn't know anything about the Pringle before I came here, and I was thinking it was like a nickname because it was shaped like a Pringle, but obviously not. It must be an 18th century name. But anyway, there we go. But I think they make a point about GPs in here, and I think it's very pertinent for a small town. Now, I know normally County Council mentions about schools. Town Council are concerned about the impact on the GP service. Do we get a health assessment done?
So if I could remind you that Esfatria is a key service centre, and that's strategically allocated that through policy S3 of the Allerdale local plan. So it's very much the sort of town that we are trying to promote, housing development in terms of our site allocations, because they have facilities, they have things like schools and shops and facilities and infrastructure, and that's why you have a local plan with a settlement boundary, because you're trying to get development close to and within existing settlements, and certainly the key service centres have, all the key service centres have a 39% requirement to provide the overall housing allocation, and Esfatria, of that 39%, is set out to provide 4%. Now, this site allocation goes forward to provide that expected amount of housing growth. So it's very much in line with the strategic objects of housing development in Esfatria.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Reminds about the Town Council, obviously, maybe it's their concerns, isn't it? So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Semple. Councillor Fairbrother, then Councillor Scott.
Right, I'm quite concerned, along with Councillor Kemp, about the children, because don't forget there's two schools in Esfatria. There's the secondary school
please.
at the top of the hill, and there's the primary school, sorry.
Let's have a question. We can go to debate.
And I'm quite concerned because experience that we had in Brigham, we had to fight like heck to get eventually a speed limit on the road where children had to walk to school after the development had been agreed. And I'm wondering, as the County Council has a policy that's called Safer Ways to School, whether they wouldn't reconsider this particular situation. Is it worth asking them again? Because that is one of their policies. They want children to walk to school and they want children to do it safely. And they could provide a proper crossing in at least where the development's going to be. And I'm wondering if they would reconsider their recommendations.
Well, in terms of this development, Cumbria Highways have assessed this scheme with regard to this particular scheme and the proposal for 65 dwellings. So it has to be in context with reasonableness for this particular housing development. Now, in terms of thinking in the wider context, in terms of if there is a need within that locality for further crossings by virtue of other development coming forward, whether the Cumbria Highways felt that there was a need for that, or the County Council, that could possibly be explored elsewhere. But from the advice given so far by Cumbria Highways is that that crossing across the road is not a requirement as part of this scheme.
Councillor Scott. Oh,
thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Fairbrother, do you want to follow up with
No,
that?
I'm just saying thank you.
Councillor Scott.
Yeah, thanks very much. We certainly visited the site with Kevin, our ward councillor there. I wonder whether the County Council, did they do that report when they knew Pringle Lane had been closed off as an option? Because if you go up the top of Pringle Lane, you have a zebra crossing straight over the road. It seems kind of silly, and it would be certainly disappointing to actually have them cross the road to then cross back again. And I wonder whether we have to go back and ask that question.
To respond to that, thank you, Chair. You may recall that through the initial course of assessing this application, initially there was going to be pedestrian access through Pringle, but in response to neighbour concerns on Pringle, our response to the Town Council, there was a further investigation in terms of Land Registry who owned Pringle, and it was found that there was no real known owner in terms of title. So I think the developer has responded, I think it's sympathetically towards what the actual residents of Pringle were advising themselves, that they actually didn't want further pedestrians going through Pringle. And that is why the pedestrian route secured through the main highway access has been considered now, rather than the more direct route through Pringle, which would be against what the local residents would want.
Follow up, Councillor Scott.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, I don't feel comfortable with seeing that built there and having children directed up the left-hand side of the road to then cross at the top with no safety or no crossing. That road is an extremely busy road, and as you've seen by the junction, it's an extremely busy junction.
Question.
So, I was sharing my opinion that I don't feel safe.
We're coming to debate. We're just going to come on to debate now, and I'll give you as much time as you need. Any more questions for the officers? Any raised hands? Right, let's go. Okay, Councillor Scott.
Sorry, Janet's just pointed out that I didn't get an answer to my question that have they considered speaking to County Council again after not having this Pringle junction available to them with regards to whether it's reviewed?
County Council are aware that Pringle isn't an option to actually have the pedestrian access through. If there is, it's not an adopted highway, so essentially any pedestrian access through Pringle potentially could be going on, private land. So in terms of clarity, that is why the pedestrian route is as it would be through the crossing at that southern end of the southern access to the actual car park of the rugby club.
Yes, Councillor Scott, they've said that it's safe that they require the access by the rugby club car park to get across. They haven't indicated that another crossing is necessary at the top end of top end of Station Road. I'd imagine that if we asked the question again, they would still just come back with the same answer, that it's not necessary to make the development acceptable with having another crossing at the top end of Station Road.
Thanks, Simon.
Councillor Scott, yeah.
I think it would be really nice to have a member of the County Council here to justify that statement.
Right, what we can do is go into debate, and you can continue with that, Councillor Scott, and motions, etc., etc., etc. So what we can do now, with no more questions from the floor, is now go into the debate element, and you can casually debate away. Councillor Lynch.
Having been born and brought up in Aspatria, I am extremely familiar with the site, Station Road, Pringle, and the Rugby Club. And that's why I asked about the road and the crossing. That is the way that you have had to go down to the train station, the Rugby Club, walking to the factories and everything. And at the top of the road, there's never ever been any form of crossing in any shape or form, and people have been using that means of going across that road for a very, very, very long time. And as far as I'm aware, there's never been any major incident there. When you go across the the road at the crossing area that they've designated. Then you go up the left-hand side, you cross over at the top. Immediately opposite is the secondary school. But if you continue down the right-hand side, you do not need to go across the road until you actually get to the school itself. And I would imagine, I mean, I don't know now, but I would imagine there is a crossing patrol there to allow children to go across. So you would only be crossing the road at the top, and you wouldn't have to cross any other road, because you just go straight down on the right-hand side of the footpath. And I think towns like Aspatriá and Wigton, that I represent, need to have new developments, because those new developments will keep young people staying in the town. As population gets older, and you need more younger people coming in with children, so that people can maintain their local schools and things. And because, you know, children grow up and leave, and if you don't have more children in an area, a school can die, and towns can become like dormant towns. And I think it's important that these developments, there hasn't been for a very long time sort of big developments of this nature in Aspatriá, and I think this is something that can revitalise towns, and I think it's very important that is considered.
Thank you, Councillor Lynch. Councillor Scott.
Yeah, thanks. It's just in response to Councillor Lynch, really. Can I just make it clear, not against this development. I think the development is probably right. I think most people in Aspatriá recognise that. But it's how we deliver that, and public safety is a big issue. You know, the crossing on Station Road at the bottom is a worthy crossing, because they come out of that estate and they have to cross a really busy road on Station Road. Then when they go to the top of the hill, we are asking them to cross back again Station Road, not the A596, Station Road, to get to a crossing for the A596. So if we're worthy of a crossing at the bottom of the road, surely we must be worthy of a crossing at the top of the road for public safety reasons.
Can I bring Rebecca into this debate?
If I could just sort of remind you as well, in terms of the crossing, it's a dropped curb rather than a proper crossing. So in terms of having that footway to the crossing, it's to enable, for example, wheelchair users or people with prams not to bump off a pavement, but to be able to access across. So when we talk about a crossing, it's making it an accessible point to cross the road. And I would expect that at the top on King Street, that already has those drop curbs to allow that access across.
You okay with that, Councillor Scott?
Not really, but carry on.
Okay. Councillor Kemp?
Yeah, I think the development's fine myself, but what really concerns me is this access across the Station Road. Kids are going to come out of there, they have to walk 50 yards out of the way to get the crossing. They then have to walk up the hill and cross over if they're going to school down thing. If they're going to Beacon Hill School, which is the biggest school in Aspatriá, they then have to cross the major trunk road to get to school, And I think we create I have nothing against the development, but I think the footway access is not into town. Very, very dangerous for children.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Would anybody else like to speak in the debate? Councillor Fairbrother?
Keeping on the same theme, I empathise with Councillor Lynch, but it's a bigger place now. There's a factory down there, creamery. There's Sealy. There's farming, big tractors and things. It's a busy road in terms of the weight of the vehicles, and that's where I think people are anxious. It's not only children going to school, it's elderly people in wheelchairs, as someone said, or not so elderly, disabled people. And I'm just wondering whether, in my experience, the county council gives the minimum solution, which then in the future actually causes a lot of issues in the community, and the solution is then sought maybe 2 or 3 years down the line. So it is a busier road, and I don't think anyone's told us where the speed limit actually begins, where the 30-mile speed limit begins. I guess it begins before the development site, but I'm not sure where it begins. Because there's a big steep hill down, first of all, isn't there? Then over the bridge.
Yeah, just by my limited knowledge, I'm pretty sure it's, and that's from the rugby club, it's 30 miles an hour, I'm pretty sure it is.
Where does it start? Well, my question is, where does it start in relation to the site? Because you come down the hill from whatever it's called. Elaine probably knows. I'm not saying it doesn't start before, but it's important to know where the speed limit begins.
It's 30 miles an hour.
If I could just, the speed limit starts way past that. You go past the station, across the station, right down the road, and it starts way out towards Alcoby. And the picture you've got on there, that would, if we're talking about children going to school, and that seems to be a key factor here, you do not need to cross that crossing there. When you come out of Station Road at the top, you would cross over and you come onto this pavement here as it's further up, and you continue down that pavement. You need to use that crossing to get across. If you go over to the other side, you'd actually have to cross other roads. If you stay on this side, you do not have to cross any road at all. And as for the factories and everything, they actually had more factories back in the day and more traffic. There's and those have been there a very long time, and people now have to cross the top of that road, the top of Station Road, without a crossing. And if this development were not there, that would still not be anything different than it is now.
Thank you, Councillor Lynch. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I'm not against this development, but I think we can go around in circles talking about the school and one thing. Would it not be, as Councillor Scott suggested, defer this and get the county council in to discuss it?
I'm going to ask Simon for advice here, because I think he's answered it once, that if we ask the county council, they'll give you the same answer.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're the Allerdale planning officers, and I can pretty much guarantee, Councillor Armstrong, that if you had a county council highways officer here, they would provide exactly the same response that they've already given to your officers, that it is not a reasonable requirement. And I would strongly suggest, members, that you heed the advice of the county council as the statutory consultee, and it would be wholly unreasonable to defer or withhold the granting of planning permission because of the absence of a controlled crossing point at the top of Station Road. There is a drop curb crossing point at the top of Station Road. It's not a controlled crossing to get back across, but as Rebecca has already explained, it's not a controlled crossing point by the rugby club that's proposed. So it's been considered what is reasonably required to make the development acceptable. We've fully acknowledged as officers in the report that a much better solution would have been via Pringle, but Pringle was it's private and it's not within any in our control or the applicant's control to provide it, and the residents of Pringle clearly are opposed to that idea. So it's not up for discussion as an alternative. It's an allocated site. The pedestrian access that's within the applicant's control and in the control of the Highways Authority and ourselves is via Station Road, and that has been, that's been considered robustly by the county council.
Councillor Lynch, then Councillor Semple, then Councillor Fairbrother.
I'd like to move a motion to accept the recommendations and delegate the granting of permission subject conditions to the Planning and Building Control Manager or Head of Service.
Thank you, Councillor Lynch. Is that seconded? Seconded by Councillor McGuckin. Councillor, before we go to the vote, I'll just allow the other two councillors to speak. Councillor Semple.
So for me is that local knowledge, which is vital, isn't it? And I think I do think it's something that a state really needs, as everybody's saying, really, aren't they? And so I fully support it.
Councillor Fairbrother.
Within the recommendations, well, there are 4 recommendations. The signing of the 106 agreement, which I think I'm okay with, even though we haven't got a viability report. But the outstanding issues with the Sports England and Network Rail, are they likely to take a while? And in which case, will we ever know what resolution you've had from those? Do you think that's going to be a long-term issue?
Thank you, Councillor Fairbrother. The way the recommendation is worded is on the resolution of those matters. If we don't resolve them and Sport England maintain their objection, we'll bring it back to you.
Thank you for that clarity.
In a minute, I can guarantee that.
Excellent. Are you okay with that, Councillor Fairbrother? Yep. So we have a motion on the floor. It's from Councillor Lynch, seconded by Councillor McGuckin, and what it is approval of this application, and the recommendation is to delegate the granting of permission subject to the conditions that are detailed in Annex 1.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, it's not true. You're not approving it today. You're delegating the responsibility to.
Sorry, I meant to mean approving of the delegation of the granting of permission. Quite right. So that's as clear as it can be. Those for the motion to delegate the granting of permission of this application as listed on Annex 1, those for. Yes, that's it. Those against? Any abstentions? The motion to delegate the granting of permission is approved. I thank you. That's the end of a very long day. And I'd like to thank all the contributors, the agents, the objectors and the councillors, and particularly, I've got to say, the sterling work of the members of staff that put in a real hard amount of work, not only to set up the conditions we have within COVID, but also the hard work they put in the 2 very complicated applications we've had today. So I
would just make the point, Chair, about I found it very, very stuffy, oppressively stuffy, and also with COVID, aren't you supposed to have some ventilation? So I do think that we need to think about that. It's incredibly stuffy. You listen to a lot of detail, and maybe we need to. There's no windows, is there? But anyway, more and over.